long before the summer of 1887, long before the whispers and the missing children, the house had already started to lean, like a tired creature sinking into the dirt, waiting for something to return. Sheriff William Dorothy had seen a lot in his 27 years wearing the badge, but nothing could have prepared him for the silence that greeted him that morning, thick as fog, hanging over the fields like a funeral shroud. The porch moaned beneath his boots, not with age, but with memory, like it was warning him to turn back. Inside, 5 bowls of porridge sat untouched on the long table, steamless now, but still full, as if the family had simply stepped outside and never come back. The air was wrong to still, too cold for June. Sheriff Dorothy found the dog first, whimpering in the root, cellar eyes wide and body stiff, like it had seen something no beast should. The cellar door had been clawed from the inside. No blood, no struggle, no goodbye, just absence. That kind of emptiness stains a place. It burrows into the bones of the floor and waits. As he stepped back into the morning light, the sheriff, thick and suffocating, by the 3rd sunrise, no one in Briar Glen dared say their names aloud, as if speaking them might summon whatever had taken them. Sheriff Dorothy, sleepless and unraveling, posted a deputy at the property, but by dusk the boy had fled, raving about voices beneath the floorboards and shadows that whispered his name. What the townsfolk couldn't explain, what truly lodged itself in the marrow of their dread, was the way the farmhouse seemed to breathe, not in any natural sense, but with an unholy rhythm, boards expanding when they should not, shutters creaking in still air, and a groaning that rose up from the earth itself, low and constant, like something in pain, convinced that prayer might sever the unseen cord that tied the place to whatever unnatural force had taken root. But halfway through his sermon, he froze, staring beyond the crowd toward the woods, mouth open in mid-sentence, eyes glassy and wet. He never finished the blessing. That night he walked barefoot into the fields, whispering scripture into the soil until dawn, refusing to say what he'd seen. At the town hall, mothers clutched their children tighter, and the blacksmith swore something in his forge went cold when he spoke of the Herowicks. But it wasn't until the Finch boy vanished that the town knew the farmhouse was not done. Caleb Finch was bold, reckless even, the kind of boy who laughed at superstition. But his dare to sleep on the Heroic porch for one night tended with a scream that cracked the air like thunder. By morning, all they found was a broken rifle and a torn Bible page pressed into the porch boards, as though it had been swallowed. No tracks, like everything else forgotten in Virginia's long, humid summers. But it didn't. It stood there, stubborn and untouched, the white paint somehow refusing to peel, the windows smudged but never shattered. It was as though the land itself wouldn't allow Connolly waiting. That fall, something strange began to settle over Briar Glen. Lamps sputtered without reason. Candles blew out when there was no draft. The schoolhouse bell rang on a Sunday morning, with no hand to pull the rope. Then came the laughter, thin, childlike, and always just beyond the tree line. First heard by Thomas Leach's daughter, who claimed a girl named Emmeline had started visiting her dreams. When her father found her sleepwalking down the Heroic Lane in the rain, she simply said, "She wants me to come home now." A child no one had spoken of in decades. Her name was scratched into the edge of a hymn book at the abandoned chapel on the hill, and her date of death was missing. From then on, the town seemed to lean away from the farmhouse, the way a body avoids pain. Birds no longer flew over it. Crops nearest the house yellowed too soon. Even the wind bent its path to avoid that cursed land. And inside the house, through gliding like someone still played there. A place not alive, but not dead either. A wound that refused to close by winter. The Herriwick house had become more than a curse. It was a mouth the town could hear breathing. At night, people claimed they heard it groan from miles away, not like wood settling, but like something old and patient, shifting its weight beneath the soil. The town blacksmith, Jeb Carter, swore he heard knocking under his floorboards. Faint but steady, like a child tapping in code. Others began waking with dirt under their fingernails and no memory of how it got there. Dreams grew darker. Townsfolk. They remembered from childhood. It wasn't just fear, now it was familiarity. Finally returned to the Herriwick place, muttering that he'd heard his late mother's voice calling from the cellar. What he found there made him drop his lantern. The floorboards had splintered open around the dog's corpse, which had not decayed but remained perfectly preserved, as if the house refused to let it go. The cellar had deepened, dug out by something with purpose. He didn't descend, he couldn't, but as he turned to flee, the lantern's light caught a new detail carved into the banister. Names. Dozens. Some he recognized: Caleb, Finch, Emmeline, Herriwick, Ruth Carter's baby boy. Others had not yet gone missing. He brought no one with him when he left. No warning to the town. Just silence. Because saying it aloud made it more real. Because somewhere beneath that house, something was listening, and it wasn't finished yet. It was Reverend Halley's who broke first. Once a man of steadfast devotion and iron ritual, he had not stepped behind his pulpit since the day he wandered barefoot into the fields, whispering psalms into the earth. But one Sunday in January, without notice or sermon prepared, he arrived early and rang the chapel bell himself. The townsfolk gathered in silence, unsure whether to feel hope or fear. He stood before them pale, sunken, trembling not with cold, but with certainty. "I've heard their prayers," he said, "but they are not for God." He spoke of the Herrowicks not as vanished souls, but as echoes made flesh memories, tangled in the roots beneath the town, replaying themselves, louder each year. He told of a hollow beneath the house, not of earth and stone, but of sorrow, of forgotten grief that had fermented into something aware. He said the house had become a vessel, and something else a collector. The congregation sat motionless as he recounted a dream, standing in the Herriwick parlor while portraits wept blood and children's voices hummed lullabies backward. He said one voice belonged to his sister, dead 20 years. Another matched the cries of the unborn child his wife had lost in 1873. "They want what was taken," he whispered, "and what was buried in silence." Then he collapsed. Some say his final words were "Open the hymn book to page 42. Others say he died with a smile, as though he'd finally remembered something he'd spent his whole life forgetting. That evening, Sheriff Darthy found the old hymn book resting, open on the altar. Its page was blank except for a single line scrawled in soot. "They know who forgot them." Weeks after Reverend Hallis's collapse, the frost began to retreat from Briar Glen, but something darker remained. It started with the soil. Farmers digging to plant early corn struck something just beneath the surface, not rocks, not roots, but bone. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Some small as a bird's wing, others long, thin, unmistakably human. The ground seemed to be giving back what had once been hidden. Sheriff Darcy, now gaunt and shaking, catalogued them in silence, refusing to let the bodies be moved from where they lay. "This isn't a burial," he muttered. "It's a memory surfacing. Town records never accounted for so many dead. No war had touched this place, no plague. Yet the bones rose like warnings, like receipts, and strangest of all, each set had its teeth perfectly intact, lips curled as if mid-scream. Children stopped sleeping, dogs howled at the earth itself. The schoolhouse chalkboard would be wiped clean, only for a single name to appear. Each morning names no one had spoken in generations. One evening, a widow named Margaret Leach dug behind her barn to plant daffodils and uncovered a full skeleton curled in the fetal position. Tied to its wrist with twine was a rusted bell, the kind once given to the infirm to call for help. It had never been rung. When she picked it up, she claimed she heard it ring not in her ears, but behind her eyes. That night, Margaret lit every lamp in her house and wrote names in a notebook until dawn, 43 of them, all lost, all now remembered. But when her neighbor came by the next morning, the notebook was gone, and so was Margaret. All that remained was the bell, placed neatly on her kitchen table, still warm to the touch. On the morning of March 6th, every mirror in Briar Glen cracked, not all at once, not with sound or violence, just slowly, as if under the weight of something unseen leaning in from the other side. Some splintered like spiderwebs, others fractured into strange, deliberate patterns that looked almost like maps. By midday, townsfolk had stopped looking into reflective surfaces altogether. Children whispered that if you stared too long, you'd see someone else blinking back. Not a stranger, but someone who should be dead. A schoolteacher named Miss Avery claimed she saw her twin brother in the shaving glass, though he'd drowned when they were 10. She said he mouthed the words, "It's your turn now." Later that night, she threw herself into Briar Pond. Her body was never found, but her boots were neatly placed at the water's edge, and beside them, her cracked vanity mirror, fogged from within. Back at the Harrowick place, strange reflections had begun appearing in the windows. Families sitting down to eat, children playing, women weeping into empty cradles. None of them were visible from the outside. Only if you stepped onto the porch and looked in through the glass. Sheriff Darcy dared not look anymore. He said he saw his father sitting at the Harrowick table, just as he'd looked the day he hanged himself in their barn. "That house," he whispered to no one, "remembers what we forget." In the general store, the mirror behind the counter was found completely black, like tar had bled through the silver. The owner tried to cover it with a sheet, but it shriveled to ash within the hour, so he left it uncovered. "Some things," he muttered, "are meant to be seen, especially when they refuse to be forgotten." She was 12 when she vanished, though no one remembered her until the dreams began. Emmeline Harrowick, the unlisted child, the family's shadow. Her name came back first in whispers, then in prayers, then scratched into the frost on window panes before dawn. Children spoke of her with uncanny certainty, as if they'd known her forever. "She lives under the house," one boy said, his eyes wide, voice hollow. She's waiting for us to join her. Then came the drawings, dozens of them slipped under doors, left in coat pockets, nailed to trees. All showed the same pale girl with black eyes and long braids, standing just beneath the floorboards, hands pressed to the wood above her head, mouth open as if mid-song. When a group of men dared to open the heroic cellar again, they found no girl, only a wall of damp, bricked earth and an old rag doll staring out from a crack in the mortar. It matched the one in every child's drawing. Sheriff Darcy took the doll home against every warning and placed it on his mantle. That night, his house groaned and the candles flickered as if gasping. The next morning, his clock had stopped at 12:06, the hour Emmeline was said to have disappeared. He would later swear that the doll had changed position in the night. When asked what he'd seen, he didn't speak. He only lifted his shirt to reveal 6 tiny bruises on his chest, shaped like fingers. Afterward, no one dared speak Emmeline's name aloud, fearing it might call her up from beneath. But it didn't matter. The town had already remembered her, and remembering was enough. There was always something wrong with the ground beneath the heroic place. Locals said it sounded hollow when walked upon, like the land itself had a secret it refused to bury. After Emmeline returned to the town's memory, that hollow began to hum soft at first, like a lullaby sung through teeth. Then came the tremors, not earthquakes, not thunder, just brief, rhythmic pulses beneath the floorboards, as if something were breathing deep under the dirt. When Ruth Carter's youngest began sleepwalking in circles around the house, whispering its listening, the townspeople could no longer pretend. They gathered at the edge of the property in grim silence, candles in hand, hoping light might ward off what prayers had failed to reach. But light flickered and failed. One Manilius Cormac, the undertaker, brought a spade. His hands moved like a man in trance, dirt flying until his fingers scraped wood. A trapdoor, beneath it, a staircase of old stone, slick with moisture and older than the house itself. No one followed him down. They only heard his voice, almost gentle, saying, "It's not just one house, it's all of them." Then silence. When someone finally dared peer below, there was no staircase, only earth, packed and still, as if it had never been opened, as if it had sealed itself again. That night, the townspeople returned home in pieces. Dreams grew louder. The hum beneath the ground became a chorus, and beneath it all was a heartbeat, deep and old. The heroic land wasn't haunted, it was waiting, feeding, becoming. By spring, the town was no longer quiet. It murmured at all hours through walls, through teeth, through cracked windows left open too long. It wasn't voices, not exactly. It was names, whispered softly at first, then louder, bolder, as if the earth was demanding acknowledgement. Names long buried, names struck from records, names the town had chosen to forget. One appeared on the schoolhouse chalkboard every morning, written in elegant cursive, no child recognized. Another was found etched into the fog on the baker's windows, Isaac Herwick, a name that had never appeared in any family record, but now was whispered in every corner of Briar Glen. The church bell tolled 7 times at midnight, with no hand near the rope, and each ring was followed by a name spoken from the rafters, too low and too slow to belong to any human mouth. The sheriff began collecting them in a notebook. 93 by the end of that week. Every one of them had a match, a missing child, a lost midwife, a drowned miner, a baby that had never drawn breath but had once been carried in a mother's prayers. It became clear the house wasn't just haunted, it was remembering, holding on to every life the town had discarded, every grief they buried instead of mourning. One morning, the sheriff found his own name written in ash across the hood of his carriage. Beneath it, scrawled in something darker than soot, "You left us." He did not return to the station after that. He simply walked toward the farmhouse and was not seen again. Some said they heard him whistling as he disappeared into the trees. Others heard only crying. But by then the house was full of names, and the wind, when it blew just right, called them out like a roll call until no one dared forget again. As spring gave way to summer, Briar Glen found itself caught in a waking nightmare. Children who once played freely were now wandering the streets at night, eyes vacant, mouths whispering words no one understood. They moved as if pulled by strings only they could see, tracing patterns through the town like lost marionettes. Parents watched helplessly, their calls ignored, their hands passing through shadows. Ruth Carter's youngest was the first to disappear completely. Last seen walking toward the Herrick house with a faint smile and a lullaby on his lips that chilled the marrow. Each morning, the town would find another child gone. No footprints, no struggle, only a thin line of frost where they had passed. Adults, too, began to falter. Farmers missed their daily chores. Blacksmiths dropped their tools mid-swing, and the Reverend's second sermon echoed in empty pews. Hallucinations became common. Flickering lights, whispered confessions in empty rooms, and fleeting glimpses of figures long dead. The line between waking and dreaming blurred until the entire town felt suspended in a liminal space between life and death, memory and oblivion. It was as if the Herrick house had reached out and pulled the very soul from Briar Glen, dragging it into the shadows beneath the floorboards. Desperation filled the air like thick smoke. No one knew who would be next to vanish, but everyone feared the answer. The Herrick house was no longer just a building. It had become a vessel of voices. Townsfolk who dared enter spoke of walls that murmured secrets in languages forgotten. Whispering sounds would drift through the cracked plaster, growing louder with every passing day, like an unseen congregation reciting confessions, prayers, and cries for help. Old Mrs. Blythe swore she heard her late husband's voice, pleading for forgiveness from behind the wallpaper. Young Thomas Leach found himself drawn to the house's living room, where the floorboards seemed to pulse beneath his feet, each beat echoing the heart of a long-dead child. When Reverend Hallis's replacement tried to conduct services there, his voice would falter mid-prayer, overcome by a chorus of faint sobbing and children's giggles. Even the walls bled, or so the stories said, oozing a dark, sticky substance that smelled of earth and sorrow. Sheriff Darthy's journal entries grew increasingly disjointed, filled with fragmented phrases like they listen. The soil remembers, and don't forget us. As winter's chill settled back in, Briar Glen's collective fear hardened into something almost physical, pressing against their skin and suffocating their breaths. The house wasn't simply haunted, it was alive with memory, and the memories were desperate to be heard, to be acknowledged. Those who stayed away too long began to hear the whispers in their own homes, creeping in through cracks and seams, refusing to be silenced. The town was becoming a chorus of ghosts, and the walls were leading the song. One chilling night, the townspeople gathered around the old chapel on the hill, drawn by an eerie melody drifting through the cold air. It was a sound unlike anything heard before, a haunting, childlike choir singing hymns backward, their voices layered with a sorrow that clawed at the soul. No one saw the singers, but the music wrapped around the trees, floated over the fields, and seeped into the bones of every listener. Some tried to follow the sound, only to find themselves lost in the woods, disoriented, as if the very forest had shifted. Parents gripped their children tighter, whispering prayers and warnings, but the voices only grew louder. Reverend Hallis's replacement attempted to lead a service to drown out the haunting, but his voice faltered, overtaken by the spectral chorus. The song told stories of forgotten promises, broken homes, and the pain of being left behind. It was a lament for the vanished, the Herwick family, the missing children, the lost souls who lingered in the earth's memory. As the night deepened, the music twisted into a plea. Remember us, remember us. It sang a call that echoed in dreams and waking hours alike. The choir was more than sound. It was a manifestation of grief given form, a reminder that the town's history was not yet settled. And for those who listened too long, the song became a siren's call, tempting them to join the vanished and never return. By late summer, the land itself seemed to mourn. Crops near the Herwick farm withered, overnight, their stalks bending as if weighed down by invisible grief. The air grew thick with a chill that no sunlight could dispel. Farmers spoke of shadows moving against the wind, dark shapes flitting just beyond sight, watching, waiting. One evening, Jacob Fletcher, a seasoned farmer, saw figures in the cornfields, pale children with hollow eyes, their faces twisted in silent screams. When he shouted, they vanished, leaving behind only the rustle of dead leaves. Desperation drove the town to gather at the fields during harvest. Torches raised high, voices raised higher, to scare away whatever haunted their land. But the shadows only grew bolder, slipping through the firelight, their whispers turning to cries. That night, the first of the harvest workers disappeared, taken in the dark with only a ragged breath left behind. No trace remained, no sign of struggle. The harvest had become a reckoning, and the shadows were hungry. With each disappearance, the land seemed to pulse in satisfaction, as though feeding on the fear and loss. Briar Glen's people realized too late that the earth beneath their feet was not fertile soil, but a graveyard, one that demanded tribute. In the years that followed, Briar Glen began to unravel, not with fire or flood, but with silence. Memories slipped away like mist at dawn, names fading from tongues and hearts. Schools closed, families moved away, and those who stayed lived as shadows of themselves, caught between forgetting and remembering. The Herwick farmhouse stood alone, swallowed slowly by ivy and rot, yet stubbornly unyielding to time. Some nights, a faint light flickered in its windows, like a candle never quite snuffed out. The land, they said, was a wound that never healed. Those who dared speak of the past were met with cold eyes and quiet warnings. The stories of vanished children, the whispering walls, the hollow beneath the earth all became taboo, secrets locked away to keep the town safe. But safety was a lie. The earth remembered. The wind carried names and voices, calling to those who would listen. And beneath the surface, in a place no one dared dig, the truth waited patient, eternal, and hungry. Briar Glen was a town built on forgetting, but the shadows it cast would never disappear beneath Briar Glen. Beneath the roots of every tree and the stones of every path, the earth held its secrets tightly. Archaeologists and farmers alike felt a strange pull when near the heroic land, an invisible force tugging at their skin and minds. Deep beneath the surface, the soil was layered, not just with dirt, but with echoes, fragments of memories trapped. Like insects in amber, voices folded into rock, sorrow crystallized into stone. Locals spoke of hearing whispers when digging wells, of seeing fleeting shadows beneath the plow. It was as if the land itself was alive, breathing in pain and exhaling despair. Those who ventured too close to the cellar found their minds flooded with visions, faces of children, their laughter turning to screams, the touch of cold fingers against skin. The hollow beneath the house was not empty. It was a chamber of remembrance, where time twisted and folded back on itself. Some who disappeared did not vanish, but were absorbed into the earth's memory, becoming part of the endless echo. The land demanded to be known, to be understood, and in return, it promised a terrible gift: you could never leave. Briar Glen's history was written in the soil land, in the silence between breaths, the night before the autumn equinox. The remaining townsfolk gathered at the edge of the heroic property, drawn by a force they neither understood nor wanted to resist. Lanterns flickered in the wind, casting long shadows on the cracked earth. No words were spoken, no prayers offered. Instead, they stood in solemn silence, bearing the weight of generations of loss and silence. The ground beneath them hummed softly, a pulse like a heartbeat that grew louder with every breath. From the darkness came a corussa, faint, haunting melody of children's voices, weaving sorrow and hope into the night air. Some saw pale figures emerging from the trees, faces familiar and impossible all at once. Others felt hands brush their skin, cold as the grave, yet tender as a mother's touch. Sheriff Dorothy's name was whispered among the crowd, a ghost among ghosts. As the moon reached its zenith, the earth seemed to open a hollow, glowing with spectral light. From its depths rose not horror, but remembrance. The towns forgotten, the lost children, the silent screams, all gathered for one final vigil, one last chance to be seen and heard. The heroic house, once a prison of memory, became a cathedral of ghosts. And as dawn broke, the people of Briar Glen understood. Some stories never end, they live on in the spaces between, in the breath of the land, and in the hearts brave enough to remember. The sun rose over Briar Glen, but the town was forever changed. The heroic farmhouse remained, an eternal sentinel watching over a land heavy with grief and memory. Though the vanished were never fully returned, their presence lingered like a shadow stitched into the fabric of the earth itself. Children grew up whispering the stories, their eyes wide with fear and wonder. The wind carried the faintest echoes of laughter and cries, a reminder that some things are never truly gone. Visitors who dared tread near the old property spoke of feeling cold hands brush their skin, of hearing soft footsteps that vanished when chased. The soil beneath the farmhouse was said to pulse with life, a heartbeat not of the living but of the lost. Briar Glen became a place where time bent and folded, where the past bled into the present, like ink spreading on old paper. The cycle of remembering and forgetting continued an unbroken loop, where memory became haunting, and haunting became home. The earth held its secrets tight, and the shadows whispered on, waiting patiently for the next chapter to unfold. Because some hauntings do not end with closure, they only deepen, growing roots in the silence left behind.